from the very important figures of the Enlightenment era includes the likes of Voltaire, who had an enormous and varied literary skill set, and he was very much committed to Enlightenment values. He had a very active intervention in humanitarian causes, and he often used irony and funny lines to make authorities, especially the likes of the church and political authorities such as the monarchy and nobility, look ridiculous. Others who were very influential in this era include Baron de Holbach or Paul Henry Dietrich, who was a German expatriate. There is also Rousseau, who was originally Swiss. There was a very important cosmopolitan element to the Enlightenment, as the Enlightenment emphasized humanity and the value of humanity and the need to help humanity. And Enlightenment thinkers tended to write their works for the whole of for the whole of humanity, and there was this kind of egalitarian spirit to the works they produced. Diderot wrote to David Hume on one occasion that, "My dear Davy, you belong to all nations. I flatter myself that I am, like you, a citizen of the great city of the world." This reflects the kind of cosmopolitan attitude that was prevalent in circles which adopted the Enlightenment project. French was the Enlightenment's common language, and this is understandable as the Enlightenment, many of its great thinkers came from France. Voltaire, along a similar line, also once said, "I see with pleasure that an immense republic of cultivated minds is being formed across Europe." There were varieties of the Enlightenment in Spain, Italy, Germany, Austria, and Russia. The Scottish Enlightenment specifically was headed by the likes of David Hume, and within England, for example, there were differences between the Enlightenment of the Midlands and the Enlightenment of the city of Manchester. The character of the Enlightenment in France was such that in that country it found its most rational reformist agenda. And this rational reformist agenda of the Enlightenment found its most forceful expression in this country of France. One thing that the philosophies of France emphasized very much during this Enlightenment era was the appeal to public opinion and their opposition to corrupt and tyrannical institutions. For example, the absolute monarchy and the Catholic Church. And sort of the kind of censorship culture that was very prevalent at the time. We can see thus that the main aspects of the Enlightenment mission were a belief in reason, in the scientific method, and in the value of knowledge. All of these would lead eventually to human happiness according to the Enlightenment perspective, and as such, one must break away from dogmatism, superstition, and irrationality. One interesting point here was that the various Enlightenment thinkers thought that human nature was constant. David Hume, for example, writes that mankind are so much the same in all times and places that history informs us nothing new or strange in this particular. This view may not be fully consistent, as there are essential differences between Western sort of constructs of human nature and other varieties of human nature, or in other words, how human nature manifests itself in various cultures and various civilizations. Nor is there an essential differentiation made between female nature versus male nature. The Enlightenment thinkers generally also thought that it was possible to formulate clear moral absolutes or universal standards. David Hume famously remarked that the end of all moral speculation is to teach us our duty, and that inquiry concerning the principles of morals. Post Enlightenment, people were less confident in these clear moral absolutes, but during the Enlightenment they were so confident so as to think that we could establish these clear moral absolutes. Another big sort of school of thought or system of thought that was prevalent in this time was materialism, in that everything we can know and experience has causes and explanations rooted in physical matter. There were a few consequences of this, but one of these was the legitimization of hedonism, and another was the active seeking of pleasure and active avoiding of pain. Marquis de Sade rejected as a moral criterion everything except that which conduces to the gratification of physical desires. And this kind of thinking was a threat to the status of religions, because religions do not think in this kind of consequentialist moral framework. There were various critiques applied to the practices of institutional organized religion. This is despite the fact that there were many religious supporters of the Enlightenment, including the likes of Gilbert White and Samuel Johnson. And there were various other forms of religion that were proposed at this time in opposition to organized religion. For example, natural religion, which was based on the observation of nature, and deism, which was that there was a reason based approach to argue for the presence of a supreme being or necessary creator, but beyond that, this supreme being or necessary creator did not interfere in the lives of people and gave people free will and rationality as faculties to use in their own daily lives and come to their own decisions. In this regard, there's a famous quote from Voltaire that he was moved by the spectacle of a sunrise. Thus he got up and said, that I believe in you, powerful God, I believe. And then he remarked, as for Monsieur the Sun, meaning Jesus, and Madame, his mother, meaning Mary, that's a different story. This shows the kind of deistic tendencies within many Enlightenment thinkers, where they believed in God, but were not very sure of, or in fact very critical of, organized religion. In the Anglican Church at this time, some encouraged deistic sentiments and tendencies, and this was particularly troubling for the Anglican Church during this period of time. Another interesting point here was Mozart's opera Don Giovanni, which was a toast to liberty. The French Revolution was initially and optimistically seen as Enlightenment principles being put into practice. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant famously remarked that the opening stages of revolution should be seen as the enthronement of reason in public affairs. What then followed was the development of Napoleon's regime, the La Grande Nation, which introduced most of Europe's rational administration and modern laws and institutions based on Enlightenment principles. When sent to Egypt, he took with him 167 scholars, scientists, archaeologists, and artists, and he published various findings. Various findings during that period were published in 20 massive volumes. More in the way of discoveries and various breakthroughs that were made during this time, Mungo Park, born in the year 1771 and passed away in the year 1805, his travels in the interior districts of Africa, He had various corrective insights based upon first-hand experience, and he challenged this kind of barbaric and backwards label that was placed on the Africans at that time. Alongside this, there was the evangelical and anti-slavery campaigner William Wilberforce, whose various thoughts on religion and slavery adopted the archetypal Enlightenment procedure of structural rational inquiry. There was also Quaguano, born in the year 1757 and passed away in the year 1800, whose thoughts and sentiments on the evil of slavery can be based on Enlightenment principles, and alongside that his support of abolishing slavery. And others, interestingly enough, others used rationality to support this institution, which shows that whether one was pro-slavery or anti-slavery at the time, there was a need to employ rationality to defend it, which can be seen in the wake of the Enlightenment and the rationalization of Western society. Robert Owen, who was born in the year 1771 and passed away in the year 1858, had a new view of society. He had various views on the management of industry and its works, which were based on his experience at a mill in New Lanark, and he advocated for practical reform. There was also the founding of the British Royal Institution in 1799, and alongside that, the breakthroughs of scientists and thinkers like Humphrey Davy, born in the year 1778 and passed away in the year 1829, who expressed commitment to the discovery of universal laws and principles in chemistry. In this era, there was an emphasis on empiricism, knowledge being grounded in experience and physical observation. This retained some role for speculative thought, although one criticism that can be laid at the Enlightenment project is it overwhelmingly got rid of classical metaphysics and put speculative philosophy on a back seat, and gave complete priority to the natural sciences, thus getting rid of a fundamental metaphysical or philosophical framework from which the natural sciences can operate on. On the note of empiricism, D'Alembert in the Encyclopedia praised Roger Bacon, Isaac Newton, and John Locke as forefathers of empiricism. This kind of empiricist attitude was furthered by advances in industrial technology. Diderot showed how mechanization multiplied human effort, and via these kinds of labor-saving devices. We can also see that the specialization of knowledge is less common than today. At an earlier stage in human history, for example, let's say before the Enlightenment, it was very easy, not easy, but much easier to be specialized in multiple sciences than it is now, because the corpus of those sciences, the primary texts, the texts that you need to study, were much less in number and much less complicated. But since the Enlightenment, it's become increasingly difficult to be specialized in one science, let alone a number of sciences. Of course, there was the phenomena of, let's say, the Renaissance man, who was a polymath, but the number of polymaths has declined over the centuries due to the fact that the various sciences have become more complicated and more highly developed and sophisticated over time. Of course, in a traditional academic sense, it may not be possible, but the internet and being an autodidact and self-learning may once again actually allow for polymaths and self-learned people in multiple sciences to take rise once again.